Hey, everybody, welcome back for the fifth episode of Inside Update in 2026. I'll be honest right up front, part of me wants to call this the sixth episode, but that's only because we did a special episode earlier this week about Sunshine Week and Catherine Revelo talking about her ongoing and very important transparency work. If you haven't had the opportunity, this is a special episode that was not broadcast live, that will not appear on radio. But what you can do is head over and check that out on any of your favorite streaming platforms. It's on X, it's on Facebook. Uh, it is some really important information for those who care about transparency and want to see that battle continue, hopefully to a victory in Connecticut. Today, though, we're talking about the newest investigation, and that is why we have Brandon Whiting with us today. Brandon, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well, doing well. I know this is a wacky morning, and I appreciate you taking the time. And for those of you listening, not watching, you'll notice that this is not Brandon becoming unhoused here. He's just simply out working. So he's doing this live from the streets, and the audio is still good quality here. But this is such an important one, and I didn't want to skip it just because you're out and about. I feel like this conversation's important. Your investigation is called Dropped Charges. A Connecticut woman is dead. Her father says officials let her killer off easy. I'm going to throw in a disclaimer before I ask you my first question, and that is that the investigation itself and perhaps some of what we talk about today, we're going to not have the strong language in this episode. The investigation definitely has strong language. There might be some discussion about violence or other unfortunate topics. So just keep that in mind. We're going to keep it radio appropriate, but to each their own here. Brandon, can you talk a little bit about Allie Standish and give us a little bit of background here?
Yeah, absolutely. So she was the daughter of the tipster who brought this to our attention, Scott Standish. Um, she worked as I don't want to say an auto mechanic, but she worked at an auto shop and she was passionate about cars. As is her dad. They would work together on them. Scott had nothing but good things to say about his daughter, as you can imagine. Said that she also, in her spare time, would bus kids with disabilities to and from school. Said she was interested in art. So all of this stuff. But the thing with Allie is she kind of had a rough go of things in life. She got into a massive accident. I believe it was back in 2017. Yeah, 2017, which left her with a permanent disability, essentially. And it also left her with more than $1 million in a settlement. Uh, Unfortunately, not too long after that, her fiance had died on his birthday in a motorcycle accident. And it was right after that, Scott believes essentially that one of the people she was living with, who she was kind of doing a favor for, Brandon Hamill, she had, she and her fiance had agreed to sponsor him to come out of jail. Um, it was just a condition of his parole that you need basically a sponsor, someone to live with, someone to kind of vouch for you, essentially. And so she and her fiance tried to help him find work, gave him a place to stay. Scott said, he worked at a job for a short period of time. And beyond that, he filed a workman's comp claim, which we linked in the story. Basically, Scott didn't have very many nice things to say about Hamill. But after Skorupski died, the two started dating. Scott was very adamant that from the beginning he thought this was a bad idea. I mean, ex-con. Turns out that Hamill had originally been in jail for sexual assault of a minor, which Scott said he was not aware of until after the story occurred, essentially. But yeah, there was allegations of just significant abuse, allegations of, Hamill basically using his daughter for the money. Scott had warned her various times, you got to get him out of the house or you're going to wind up dead. And unfortunately, that ended up being true. So it was February 10th, 2024. Allie died under kind of strange circumstances. She was ran over in her driveway by a friend of her boyfriend, and he was charged. Hamill was charged. But the father believed that, given all of the circumstances, which we go into detail with in the story, he thinks that it should have been murder. Apparently, the cops that were investigating did as well. They were not keen on getting back to me when I reached out to them, so no surprise there, really. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. And after all of this, there was another individual who was friends with Hamill, Ed Pratt, who took it upon himself, allegedly, we'll throw that in there, to defraud basically his daughter's estate, forged a power of attorney for Hamill, who was injured shortly after all of this occurred because he got into a motorcycle crash from a motorcycle that Scott said didn't belong to him and that he stole out of his daughter's garage. And he basically was trying to access her investment accounts. He charged about $600 or so worth of auto parts to his girlfriend's car, which he later then got a note from Hamill saying, "Oh, I gave him permission to use the card, so it's all good." And he is the only one out of all of this to walk totally free, despite the fact, I don't want to go out on a limb here, but if you go through the story, yeah, I don't want to say anything that'll get us in legal
Let me
legal
speak to
straits,
that.
but
Yeah, let me speak to that directly because I think that one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this story is the complexity of writing something like this. And
yes.
part of what we do in this show, right? One of the reasons Inside Update exists is we don't want to just browbeat the story itself. We want people to go and read the actual investigation. But I think it is wise for us to talk about exactly these kinds of challenges because this tip was one where it's emotionally charged. It's devastating to a family. There are open and ongoing questions, but it wasn't something that we felt we could just simply kick down the road and pick up, months or years from now, because there is an active question that could positively or negatively impact others' lives at the same time. And I think the quote that I don't even think it's a spoiler because I think we've used it in a variety of places, but the quote that this investigation has at the very end from the father, Mr. Standish, is, quote, "I think the public needs to know that if they're expecting justice in Connecticut, they're not going to get it." And I do feel like that challenge being put out there for someone to actually, this is a former employee of the Connecticut justice system who really has a better understanding than I think most people about how these things unfold successfully and unsuccessfully. For someone in that position to be so disillusioned, to be so frustrated, I think it does warrant bringing that question to the public and putting it out there. Obviously, we don't propose specific policy recommendations. We don't hold a position about how these people should have been punished. What we can do is raise the question of, okay, does Standish have a leg to stand on here? Look at this fact pattern. And I think maybe you could also talk a little bit about the exploration of how this came to be. One of the things that you did really well here was translating. And I think we cut something like 3,500 words out of this at one point because you went into such great detail about the police reports, explaining all of the different paths. And even in the end, it feels incredibly thorough. So I guess, could you talk about that, like interviewing someone who is emotionally invested in this and then comparing it to police records and court transcripts? And, what does that work process look like for you? And how are you going about the business of parsing out emotionally charged quotes from legally verified fact, let's say?
Absolutely. So Scott actually was referred to us by another person that I've worked with in the past who is familiar. Just basic, you know, they were involved with law enforcement. I'll put it that way. And yeah, he just said, he basically gave me the rundown of the story, and then he said, "Look, I've got, just a massive binder full of all the police reports. So basically, everything that they write up as they're doing the investigation into his daughter's death, and then into the subsequent fraud allegations afterwards. He had some news articles for me. He had photographs, text messages. So it was quite a bit to go through. And it was also, organizationally, it was a bit of a nightmare, just to be honest, because the way that the case reports are written, there will be like 3 or 4, like every officer is writing their own one, and they could be writing about events that occurred on one day, but because they wrote the report like 3 days later, then it's dated that way. So then I just had this question in my mind of, okay, do I organize it on the date the report was written or to the date that it was written about? And then some of them span several days. So just getting everything to make sense in my mind enough to write this was it was a pretty arduous task. Scott was obviously very helpful at filling in the gaps and kind of helping me make sense of everything. But yeah, I do think that there is kind of a good dichotomy in that, you know, whenever you're writing a story, any story really, there's the facts as we know them, or as best as we know them, and then there is the opinions and the emotions. And I feel, as my job, I'm not here to make emotional statements, I'm here to tell a story. And I think it's really on the people that I speak to share their emotions. So Scott, I mean, obviously this being so close to him, no shortage of emotion from him, Um, and it's interesting too because I've spoken to a lot of people in kind of difficult circumstances, family tragedies, and I think the thing with Scott is, he's a gruff guy. He's a straight shooter. He'll tell you like it is. And really just the biggest emotion for him was just dissatisfaction and really just anger. Anger because he feels as though, you know, he was kind of pushed to the margins on this. I know as we go through in the story, kind of the elements of the whole court, the cases that have arisen from this, of which there were four criminally for 3 different people. And now he's stuck in 2 civil suits to try and get the money that has been, basically he's locked out of in his daughter's estate. That was really where the dissatisfaction laid. And that's kind of what jumped out to me with the story, just because we've spoken with it's just becoming a recurring theme, unfortunately, just kind of dissatisfaction with how the courts work. And, it is a fact of life that courts, they're institutions, right? Institutions are made up by people. People are going to make mistakes. But Scott's story is just it's been emblematic of a pattern that's been made clearer and clearer to me. And, honestly, if we haven't been writing about it, perhaps the story wouldn't even have came to us, because I imagine that the past work we've done on this matter is why it got referred to me, to be entrusted with Scott's story in the first place. So yeah, I think I've
Can I jump
kind of
in on that?
transcended your question. Yeah, exactly.
No, and I mean that is what I wanted to get out of it, is because I feel like uh, in the justice system, you're absolutely right. Human decision making is ultimately what drives something, and I know I've talked about it before, but it's one of the reasons why we would never say like Connecticut's justice system does X. Connecticut's justice system is an idea. It's a bunch of words on paper. It doesn't do
Yep.
anything. But judges, attorneys, guardians ad litem, conservators, right? Maybe I'm giving away some of what's coming out in the next couple of weeks. But we are actually talking about real human beings who make decisions. And I think that's just as important to talk about when we say, oh, inside investigator went through this to publish a story. No, like Brandon Whiting, the investigative reporter, had to deal with real human beings who are going through really difficult times in their lives, and understanding, A, you should always be skeptical of all journalists, all media, all information that you're presented with as truth. It's one of the reasons that we use primary sources and try to, play this game of making
Yeah.
sure credibility is so important to our ability to do business. So there's that element of it. And the other thing that you touched on that I wanted to make sure I was mentioning is, yeah, there does seem to be a growing, long-standing problem with something like plea bargaining, or you've written about accelerated rehabilitation. We've talked about the Board of Pardon and Paroles. Huge numbers of people getting additional leeway to get lesser accountability. Whether that's right or wrong, there is this interesting conversation that I think is directly tied to our mission to root out corruption, which is to show these are the decisions that are being made. Love them, hate them, think they're fair, think they're horrible. That's fine. But you should be informed. And when you go into these debates, hopefully decision makers are also reading our stuff. I know for a fact that our articles are being read at all levels of state and local government every single day. Partially, I think, because people are nervous that their names are going to show up in our paper here. But there's a lot of problematic areas that I really appreciate you digging into. I want to talk about two things that are, in my mind, clear and away corrupt. And these are kind of the one that I really want to focus on is one that actually came up in the investigative process almost near the end, and that is the censoring by Department of Corrections officials. You reached out to Hamill and Sedlowski via Securus, which is the messaging system used by Connecticut to contact incarcerated people. And Department of Corrections officials did not seem all that pleased with your decision to seek comment. What happened there?
Yeah, absolutely. So with Sedlowski, it's a little bit of a gray area because we kind of don't know. I had reached out to him, and Sedlowski, I'm not sure if I had used his name before. He was the one who was in the truck and, accidentally backed over Allie, essentially. So the one most, I guess, directly, even though kind of accidentally responsible for her death. Um, I reached out to him, and initially he seemed interested in speaking with me. He basically said, what do you know? What do you want to know? Paraphrasing. And before I could reply to him, it just said blocked. And so, I've do my Googling. It doesn't tell me whether, so basically with Securus, the inmate themselves can block you, which, duh, I mean, that makes sense. But
Sure.
also, DOC could block you as well. And if DOC blocked me, either which way, I didn't get like a notification to tell me who blocked me. So I don't know whether it was him. I don't know if it was the Department of Corrections. We don't know. But with Hamill, yeah, that was pretty clear cut. I mean,
Yeah, we got an
I,
email.
yeah,
Or you got an email that literally says, "Hello from JPay. The email you sent was censored." Uh,
yes,
and the reason
yep,
it was given was content. But as I read it, at least, you just sought comment. We have a screenshot of this censoring, which is, normally I feel like that word is used somewhat hyperbolically, but here it's
yeah,
literally just
literal,
quoting the document.
yeah,
You're asking, hey, what happened? Do you want to talk about it? Here's kind of what we're digging into. And DOC officials basically just said, nope, we're not allowing you to ask these questions, which that can't feel good from a journalistic perspective. But I know it doesn't feel good from a business management in journalism perspective either.
I mean, to me, it's just, I don't know, because at the end of the day, like, I'm here to do my due diligence, right? Like, we're getting this story, and obviously we have all this documentation behind it. Um, and we're hearing from Scott, you know, it's I got to do my due diligence, right? Like I have to reach out to the people who the last thing that they want to see is, a phone call for me where I'm like, hey, I'm currently writing this humongous story where
Yep.
there's all these horrible allegations against you. But at the end of the day, if I didn't do that and we published the story and they didn't hear from me, they're not going to be happy about that either. And if I was in those circumstances, I wouldn't be either. So in a sense, it's kind of just, it feels grimy to me because it's denying someone who is kind of the center of a story his right to involve himself in the story, speak for himself. I don't really know what the reasoning could be from DOC. That Catherine's like, our first instinct was to call her Catherine because that's her, that's her niche, is just knowing all of those rules. So I'd be curious to see what exactly, like what rule did it violate? I don't know. Legally, maybe, it could be to the person's benefit, perhaps. Like, I don't know. Could you,
They'll
if you're in jail,
plead the fifth, not
yeah,
plead the fifth for them. Yeah.
if you're in jail, I mean, it's not like we've heard from plenty of people, and I'm sure it's been reported by plenty of people. It's hard to get a hold of. It's hard to mount a legal defense while you're in prison. It's hard to
Yes.
communicate with lawyers while you're in prison. So I imagine that's a question where when I give it to you, ideally the person would probably want to speak to a lawyer first. So maybe in some way it like saved him from incriminating himself or saying something he wouldn't have wanted to say ultimately. But at the end of the day, it really is, I don't know. It's the man, quote unquote, just getting in the way of a person speaking for themselves, to put it,
Yep.
as straightforward as you can.
And there's two other sides to that too. I mean, sure, is that their place? There's no doubt in my mind that it's by the letter of the law, but just because something's by the letter of the law certainly doesn't mean that it's not corrupt. And, that's something that we contend with often in both ways. I think that there's times when, there's something that's just not surmountable and we have to say no to a tip that we would otherwise write about, knowing that it won't have as great an impact or ability to actually accomplish our mission as another story might, right? It's one of the hardest parts of this job. The other part of this that I want to mention, though, is the fact that you censored Brandon's communications results a little bit in the Streisand effect, right? We're going to talk about the fact that you didn't do this. It's going to become a bigger deal. We have, frankly, as soon as I saw that, my first question was, how does this actually work? I feel like every inmate should be aware, like, did they get a notification that communication was blocked on their end as well, or are they completely in the dark that someone tried to reach out to get their side of the story? And that's a bone that I'm not gonna bury. I think that we're gonna carry that for a while and see what else we can do with it, because that it has a chilling effect in some ways, but it's also just, it's removing a really important line of communication that I feel like I need to have a much better understanding of.
It's interesting that you say that too. Actually, it's funny because when you first started off, you touched on something that I was thinking about earlier. There's the court of law and then there's the court of public opinion, And so I think with a lot of these stories, we're not lawyers, but if you can make a compelling case that perhaps the court of law is violating some of the basic principles of the court of public opinion, then we'll think the story is worthwhile to tell. So
Yes.
that little thing aside, but on the element of censorship, what was interesting is, so on Securus, I imagine a lot of people are unfamiliar with how it works, but you go in and you have basically a contacts list. It just functions like an email inbox, but you have to go out there and you have to look up the person that you're willing to message, and then it adds them to a contacts list, and then you compose a message, subject line, send it to them. So immediately when I added Hamill, I typed out and I sent him the message, and I got a notification. When someone messages you back in Securus, you get an email. So I got a message back from him. I got emailed, pinged that he had messaged me back like 3 or so hours, I want to say, after I sent the initial message. And he had messaged me just basically asking, like, hey, who is this? Like, I saw your name added to my contacts list. Do I know you? And I figured it was just like, well, he'll figure out who I am as soon as my message delivers, because that's another thing. You talk to just anyone who has a loved one on the inside, or who is, kind of involved in that sphere of like prison reform or prison rights advocacy, they'll all tell you that there is oftentimes significant holdups with Securus, right? Like, even if you're not being censored, there's a big delay, and it can vary, from a few hours to a few days from when someone presses send to when the person you're sending it to actually receives the message. So I just figured that was what was happening. And then I think maybe like the next day I got the message saying, your mail has been censored. And I'm like, well, now he's never going to know who I am. Well,
Right.
I'm sure he'll find out eventually, but yeah, I was like, damn. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
That really is. It really is. Listen, we're down to our last couple minutes here, and I guess let's wrap up first, just with a thank you again for you've carved out a niche of tackling difficult topics, and I will of course throw out there into the World Wide Web that if you have other topics that you think Brandon should be looking at, reach out to the guy. He's obviously a very talented writer. He genuinely cares about this work. He's out there putting feet to pavement, as you could see today, with chasing down various tips and stories every single day. You can reach him, Brandon, at insideinvestigator.org. You can check out our staff page on our website, which actually has a variety of ways to get in touch with him. Or you can always email tips@insideinvestigator.org. That'll put it into a more general mailbox that we then tackle in editorial meetings to kind of break up who is going to tackle what topics. Other than that, I wanted to just thank everyone who has supported us through these last several years. We are coming up somehow on our 4th birthday, which is really exciting. You may not have seen it, but Brandon actually won an award last week from the New England Newspaper and Press Association, along with Catherine, for their work on partial record. So dealing with sexual misconduct and records problems at CSCU and UConn. Some really exciting stuff going on, and we could use your help. We want to be doing more of this. We're a nonprofit organization, and one of the things that sets us apart is we don't have ads. We don't have paywalls. We don't take money with editorial strings attached. 100% of our revenue comes from voluntary donations from people who believe in our mission to root out corruption in the state of Connecticut through investigative journalism. If you believe that this is important work, and I certainly hope you do if you've listened to the episode this far, please head over to insideinvestigator.org, hit that donate button in the top right, and we would be honored to receive your support. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode, and until then, please don't be corrupt.